welcome our guest tonight, Phyllis Hope, and our speaker, Greg Kerwin, and I think those are our two guests tonight. I don't think our speaker needs any introduction. Greg Kerwin from the Kerwin Law Firm. He lives in Likens. He and his wife Beatrice have 3 children, 2 daughters and a son, and 7 grandchildren. What more do I need to say?
That sums it up.
Okay, I'll let you take over. All right. You're up.
Do I have to stand up here?
I
feel like I'm giving a speech.
Usually,
Well,
your
Clipboard.
thank you.
I didn't think the clipboard would make that much.
And all you members and guests for inviting me here tonight. It's a real honor, and it's to talk about the Kerwin Law Firm, and that's hard to do, to talk about your family and yourself, you know. But so I don't want to sound like I'm a braggart or anything like that. But I'll try to run through it from the beginning up to the present. And Mr. Marjoram just handed me this card with his vintage 1926 Studebaker. That just reminded me that my grandfather, his name was Joseph Seasalts. That would have been my mother's father. He started practice 1 year later in 1927 in Schuylkill County. Now, actually, he was admitted to the bar in Washington, D.C. in 1921. He went to Georgetown University, worked for the government for those years before 1927 when he moved to Schuylkill County and got admitted to the Schuylkill County bar. So it would have been about the same time as this car, but I don't remember him ever having anything like that. It's a beautiful car. So I don't have much on my grandfather, other than I brought this, and I don't know where this came from. My mother gave me that, but this would have been my grandfather, Joseph Seasalts. And he practiced, as I said, in Schuylkill County from 1927 until he died in 1945. And before that, he went to Georgetown Law. Before he went to law school, well, while he was going for law school, he worked in the War Department. And as this mentioned here, it says during the World War. Well, that would have been the first one, the First World War. He worked and then went to school at night, and then eventually got his law degree from Georgetown, stayed in Washington until 1927, and then got admitted to the Schuylkill County bar. And I'll talk a little bit more about him. It so happens that my father, of course, Patrick Kerwin, was also an attorney, and he started practice in 1945, the same year that my grandfather died. As a matter of fact, my mother and father got married, were on the honeymoon, and then the next day they got a phone call from my grandmother saying that my grandfather had died. So it sort of spoiled their honeymoon. But they never practiced together. So my dad's practice started in 1945, and he, during the first 3 months of his practice, he said he made $100 in 3 months. But also at that time, he had a job with the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. He was involved in politics. He was a great Democrat, and he worked for the Treasury Department in the late 1940s as he built his practice. And then he got involved deeper into politics, but always maintained his law practice. His thought was that politics was so uncertain, state government was so uncertain, that you always had to have a trade, something to fall back on, in case the political parties changed at the time, that sort of thing. So he had a number of state jobs. At one point in the 50s, from 1954 till 1960, he served as chairman of the Pennsylvania Liquor Control Board. Prior to that, he was Governor George Leader, who, that's a name you remember, he was his campaign manager. And that's really how he got that job after Governor Leader was elected. Of course, they made these political appointments, so he was appointed to the, as chairman of the Pennsylvania Liquor Control Board. But he always maintained the law practice on the side. So he served in that capacity until about 1960. And this was an article that was written about him by Paul Beers, who was a reporter for the Harrisburg Evening News and Harrisburg Patriot back in the 60s and 70s. And this was written in 1977, I believe, this article. So we have it in our office. But when he was interviewed by Paul Beers, this is a quote, it says, this is my dad speaking, "I tried to keep a measure of independence," he said, "and I did that by maintaining my law practice. I wasn't going to be beholden to politics for my livelihood. Heck, I paid out to politics more than it ever paid me." He said, I made $15,000 a year, which at that time was a good salary, running the world's biggest liquor monopoly, which the Pennsylvania Liquor Control Board is, still is. And it was the worst job on Capitol Hill. I spent my time saying no to legislators, lawyers, cabinet officers, even the governor's office. If you didn't say no, you ran a bad liquor control board. So that sort of taught me a lesson. I remember as kids, when he was serving as chairman, at Christmas time there'd be all these packages from all these different people that would come to the house, Christmas gifts. Some were like power tools, like electric power, drill, saws, all the bottles of liquor. These all came from vendors who had affiliation with the Liquor Control Board. And he would send them back, you know. And I remember one time somebody sent a tape recorder, which at the time was sort of state of the art. And he said, "No, that has to go back." And I said, "Dad, why are you sending that back? Why keep that?" He said, "Someday you'll understand why I have to return this." So, you know, that was a lesson that I think that was instilled in all of us, that these people were all looking for something in return. And that's why he said it was the hardest job he ever had, because he'd get calls from state legislators. Somebody in my constituency got a fine from the Liquor Control Board. Can you do anything about it? Try to fix things under the table. So people were always asking for favors. So that, I think that instilled in us, a certain philosophy that you just got to be careful with everything you do. So I'll leave this here now, if any, for a little while, a few days, a few months, or whatever, and pick up if anybody wants to read anything about that.
Okay.
I just want, before we go forward, I want to go back a little bit and talk about my grandfather, Joseph Cecil, because he practiced during the Depression when, it was very, I imagine it was very difficult. And I'll leave these, this is the Schuylkill, it's called Schuylkill Legal Register. This is where the court cases are recorded from that period of time. I brought a couple volumes. One's 1933 to 1934, and the other's 1936. But we have a bunch of others back in the office. But they're very interesting. I'll leave these here as well if anybody wants, just to pick out a case and maybe read. These are real stories. These are real people. This isn't fiction. These are real court cases. And it's a matter of public record. So this case, for instance, this case was Nunemacher versus Nye, and this was from March 2nd, was decided March 2nd, 1936. And my grandfather at that time had represented an individual who bought a car and of course was making payments on the car. The car was in an accident, and for one reason or another, the company that held the promissory note on the car demanded payment in full. And in those documents at that time, there would be what's called, and even today, what's called a confession of judgment, meaning that if you sign that as a borrower, meaning that the creditor, if he thinks or she thinks you defaulted, you can take that document to the courthouse and enter it as a judgment right away. There's no hearing, there's nothing. You just get, the other side gets a judgment. So my grandfather had petitioned the court to what's called open the judgment, set aside the judgment. And that case was upheld. He won that case, and it was for, I think, $230 was in dispute at that time, but the judge ruled that the gentleman who signed the note didn't understand what he was signing at the same time. It was misrepresented. So there's a whole slew of interesting cases in here now. I have some of them, some of them I don't. But I'll leave these here. Here's a case. Now, my grandfather wasn't involved in this, but this is from 1936, and this is where a worker was hurt on the job. A beer keg had fallen on his foot, and his big toe, of course, broke his toe, but caused other injuries as well because he had an undisclosed heart ailment at that time, and that has exacerbated that situation. But anyway, the case, he won the case, but it was against the D.G. Yingling and Son, Inc. Mr. Martin said his company's been around as long as Yingling Brewing Company has been. The two oldest. But as I go through these, you have to look at each case to find out who the lawyer is. There's no index. So, but as I go through these, I found a lot of cases that involve my grandfather. And these cases were $200, $300, $1,400. That was like a big case then, But it's interesting. Here's a case where he didn't do so well. This was in 1934, and this was a divorce case where the plaintiff, that was the husband, had filed for divorce against his wife, alleging that his wife had willfully, maliciously, and without reasonable cause deserted him. See, you had to have grounds for divorce back then. There was no such thing as no fault. You had to prove the other party was wrong. And desertion was the grounds for divorce. And that's what they asserted, that she had deserted her husband for 2 years, and then that's the reason she should be divorced. But then it goes on to say here, the other side said that the wife testified that for a period of 7 years preceding May 1st, 1929, the plaintiff had beat her or choked her a whole dozen times. Many times he would throw her out of bed. But this is the detail that they go into. This is real life stuff. One night about 3 a.m. in January 1929, the plaintiff came home drunk, shoved her against the door, thereby striking her head against a key in the door, pushed her against the clothes hooks, causing blood to flow from the wounds, and their injuries thus received so affected her physically and mentally that she was confined to bed for a period of 2 weeks. So guess what? The judge ruled that she had grounds to desert her. That's one grandpa lost. But there's some winners in here. Some winners and some losers. He took all kinds of cases. Pretty amazing. But unfortunately, I never met him because I I was born in 1951 and he died in 45, but he was quite a character. He had polio as a child, so his one leg was actually like 10 inches shorter than his other, so he dealt with that his whole life. And that's why he was never drafted into the Army at that time. So, okay, enough of that. Now we'll go back to my dad. I came into the practice with him in 1975, so that's when it became Kerwin and Kerwin. And then in 1980, my brother Terrence joined us. And then in 1988, my brother Joseph joined us. So presently, at our office here in Elizabethville, and we have an office in Harrisburg, which is part-time too, we have 7 lawyers, 6 of whom are full-time. My nephew, Representative Joe Kerwin, I always call him Joseph. I can't get away from that. Joe is how he's known politically. He works, but he's only part-time because he's with the legislature. So, altogether, starting with this guy's responsible for it all. Joseph, he started it. There he has 13 direct descendants who are lawyers, either grandchildren or great-grandchildren. And you asked me if I had notes. I had to take notes because I had to count the number of lawyers. So we start with Joe. Actually, he was, of course, my mother's father, and then my dad was a lawyer, and of course I am, and then my brother Terry and my brother Joe. Now, my brother Pat, who's not a lawyer, he has a son and a daughter, both of whom are lawyers. I have 2 daughters who are both lawyers. Terry has a daughter who's a lawyer. And Joe, the youngest, he has 3 children who are lawyers. Well, Carolyn, the youngest, just graduates from Widener on Thursday this week, so we'll call her a lawyer too. So then, of those 13 direct descendants, then 6 of those 13 are married to other lawyers. Oh my God. So that's to get back to where we are now, we practice mainly, we do a lot of real estate. That's a big part of our practice. A lot of estates and wills and powers of attorney. I don't any longer, and Linda will testify to that. I used to be solicitor for Washington Township and a number of other boroughs and townships, but I faded out of that. My brother Joe represents a number of municipalities, so we do a lot of municipal work. We just keep plugging away. That's about it. We've had four different offices in Harrisburg over the period of time. We started out in the Blackstone building. Of course, that building was bought by the county, so we got thrown out of that building. We went to 100 Chestnut Street. I haven't had much luck. That building was owned by the county also, and eventually we had to move from there. We went to 27 North Front Street, which was Bill Balaban's building. That was in a historical area, and then he sold the building to the Dauphin County Library, so we had to move out of there. Where we are now, I have to look at my card. 2601 North Front Street. But it used to be that you needed an office downtown in Harrisburg, in the county seat, close to the courthouse, because you went there every day, you know, to file papers, or if you had cases or whatever, but mostly filing things, or doing searches, that sort of thing. But now, a lot of those law offices are gone, dispersed out into the suburbs or somewhere else, because you don't have to go to the courthouse anymore, unless you have a case at trial. But if you want to look up a deed, you can do it online, and you can file your deeds electronically, you know, so that's that's part of the law practice that as an older lawyer I sort of missed, because you would see other lawyers there. You didn't get time to talk and compare notes and talk about different cases, what's going on, but that's all sort of gone now in this new age. So, but that's the way it is. It's not coming back. It's going to be that way forever, And some lawyers don't even have offices. They just work at home. So, what else can I tell you? I mean, I told you about my two daughters. Shannon, is the second daughter. She works with us now. She's been there for about 5 years. Prior to that, she worked in the DA's office for about 14 years. And her husband's also an attorney. He works in the DA's office. Angie, the oldest daughter, she got her law degree, just practiced just a short time, and then took a foreign service test with the Pennsylvania Department, with the U.S. Department of State, and became accepted into the Foreign Service, which is a highly selective kind of thing. So she's been with them for well over 20 years. And she says to me, Dad, I can retire. I said, retire? You can't retire before you're old man. There's something wrong with that. But she's done very well there. She was involved, you remember a couple of years ago, where they brought back the remains of POWs from the Korean War from North Korea. She actually was involved in that. She was in the flight that went over to North Korea, and came back with the remains of those servicemen. So that was a proud moment. And also, just recently, she was involved in those negotiations for the exchange of the basketball player, the pro basketball player who was detained in Russia, so she was sort of instrumental in that sort of behind the scenes. So she's done very well. She's pretty highly ranked over there. My nephew, Jay Clayton, I don't know if that's in there, that would be my sister's son. He was appointed by President Trump. You see how the politics sort of changed a little bit. Over the years, he was appointed to the U.S. Securities Exchange Commission and served there as chairman for 4 years under President Trump. He was a Wall Street lawyer before. He went to the University of Pennsylvania and did well there, and then went with a firm in New York City, Solomon and Cromwell, and that firm deals in mergers and acquisitions of big companies. So here I'm in Elizabethville all these years, and this guy's a lot younger than I am, and he's doing really well. But he spent his first 2 years in Lycans. He lived in Lycans because his mother, my sister, was married, is married to Walter Clayton, Jay's father, and he was stationed in Vietnam for at least one tour, maybe a little more than one tour. So during that time, she and her young son Jay lived with us up in Lycans. So he has sort of humble beginnings too. So I always remind him of that. Don't let that go to your head, But he's now back to practicing law, and he's on the board of American Express, and he gets requests to do interviews on these business network shows. I haven't even seen this. That's Jay.
Non-executive chair of Apollo,
He's
board member and senior policy advisor for Sullivan.
I was always jealous of him because he had kept his hair. He got those genes from his father. Nobody in our family has them. But he's here now. This was 3 weeks ago. This is CNBC. That's him talking. I this one yet, so I don't know what he's gonna say. Maybe I shouldn't be showing. But anyway, that's him. We're very proud of him. And he's done very well, and he still remembers his very beginnings. He's very humble and down-to-earth guy, but some of that stuff that he talks about, even though I've been practicing for 48 years, I don't understand it. This cryptocurrency and all that kind of stuff that they gotta be into, that's a big thing now. So I'm sort of kind of glad I'm getting towards the end.
Yeah.
It just gets more complicated.
Is it all on television?
Yeah, every couple of weeks he writes articles for the New York Times. Now, and he's a moderate, I would say. He's not, today in politics there's so many extremes on the right and on the left, it's just too bad there aren't more people that you can bring into the middle. But I think he's one of those guys. So, okay, that's 20 minutes at least, so anybody have any questions?
Greg, when your nephew was having his hearings to be appointed to the security exchange, did he mention that his roots in Lincoln? Do you remember going into Miners Bank?
Yeah. Yeah, see, my dad was also president of Miners Bank of Lycans for 5 years, and before that he was a board member. But he would take my nephew, his grandson, in there, and that left an impression on him. For one reason or another, that was a big deal, I guess, to go in and then, how they had the cages up front, you actually go behind there. So, yes.
Right. How do your family gatherings go? Who wins the debates?
I usually do.
Yeah.
Your daughter,
I always say to my brothers, you gotta listen to me because I'm older, but that doesn't carry any weight. Yeah.
I made settlement, I guess that was about 6 or 7 years ago on my home, and your brother Terry handled the settlement for the heirs of John Wiest, and my attorney representing me was Jim Spade out of Hershey, and the two of them knew each other somewhat, so it was really an interesting meeting. And your brother Terry, who's now my attorney, he started talking about your Irish roots, and I found that fascinating. I was hoping that you would talk about that here too.
Well, yeah, that goes back to would be my grandfather on my father's side. Worked in the coal mines right up here in Wigan-Isco. And he had one of the better jobs because he was a hoist operator. So he was actually outside the mine. He wasn't down inside breathing all those dust and fumes and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, and they had a bunch of kids. I guess that's, that was sort of an Irish Catholic tradition, sort of like the Amish today, but, and some of them didn't survive, So, fortunately my dad never had to work in the mines, but he was the only one of, I guess there were 9 of them. Again, 2 of them died as children, but he was the first one to go to college, to get to college, and he went to St. Vincent's College out in the western part of the state, and then later went to Temple Law School in Philadelphia, the night school, worked during the day, and then went to Temple at night, and that's how he got his law degree. But those were tough times then because there weren't the kind of programs to help at that time. You saved your money if you wanted to send your kids to school, and that was it. There weren't no student loans or anything like that. Right. And my grandfather, he worked in the mines, but he also had, he operated a bar room.
I recall your brother saying that.
The basement of what was the Lycans Hotel. Now, he didn't own it, but he was like the manager, the operator of it. So he had sort of 2 incomes then at that point in time. So.
How's Candace doing?
Oh, Candace, that's my brother's daughter.
Yeah.
Candace is an attorney with McNeese, Wallace, and North
Okay, she's
in Harrisburg. You heard of that firm? It's the biggest firm in Harrisburg.
She clerked with, I worked with her when she was a law clerk for Justice Saylor.
She's doing very well. She's the head of their litigation department, and of course is a partner, you know. So she's doing very well.
Daughter Angie, you said?
Angie.
Where does she live?
Well, she has a house in Lycans, but she spends most of her time, she has an apartment in Arlington, Washington. She's down there. She comes home on the weekends.
Your mother and dad, how did they meet? Because your mother's father was a lawyer. Did they meet through the profession?
I think it was Sarah. I'm not sure. I get conflicting reports about it. My dad was older than my mom. My dad was 9 years older than my mom. That's quite a big age, because he was, I guess she was 20 and he was 29 or something like that. So.
And her dad was the lawyer.
Her dad is the lawyer, yeah. But I think the way my mom tells it is that she sort of gave him the ultimatum, and they got married in February. And I said, why would you ever get married in February? Nobody gets married, no one thinking back.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, well, it's either time, you know, we either get married or move on. Because they had gone together for, I guess, a number of years. But I don't know then, you know, as I said, tragically, she was my grandfather's pride and joy, and tragically the next day, he dies of a heart attack, you know. And he was only in his 40s then at that time.
So he left a widow then.
Yeah, he left, and that was before Social Security at that time. He didn't have, so she didn't get Social Security, but he knew, you know, he was not a healthy person, and he knew that his own life, that his longevity was not in the cards for him. So he took out an annuity when he was young with New York Life, and it provided for a monthly stipend for my grandmother for life. Now I said that was one of the best deals. I mean, that insurance company must have been crying their hearts out because he was young when he died, and she lived a long time. She was 96 when she died, so they were paying the whole time. But that was the only thing she had. You know, it wasn't Social Security. Okay, well, no other questions?
Could you share like what law school you attended, and was that a family tradition, the school?
It's sort of, well, my dad went to Temple. Well, as a matter of fact, my dad started out at Dickinson, went a semester there, and then transferred to Temple, I guess working or whatever. But I went to Dickinson, and my brothers both went to Dickinson as well. And both my children went to Dickinson, and Terry's two children went to one went to Dickinson, the other one went to the University of Richmond.
That's interesting. Yeah.
And Candace went to the University of Virginia Law School, and this is gonna be a test now for me to remember where everything went.
Oh, don't worry. Yeah, I thought there was a legacy of Dickinson.
Yeah, mostly Dickinson. Joe's two boys went to Dickinson, if I didn't. Joseph and Jack, and Carolyn went to Weiner. Carolyn's going to graduate on Thursday, as a matter of fact. Now she's committed to the JAG Corps. She's going to spend 4 years in the Army as a military lawyer. So.
And that's Carolyn.
That's Carolyn, yes.
I had them all in school. They were wonderful.
So, okay, I took enough time. I'm sure you have other business to do. These are just interesting to read some of these cases because they're, you know, we see the TV dramas today and everything. Some of this stuff is as good as that. And the names are not changed. Most Most of these people, I presume, are deceased now, as in the thirties, but so. So I'll leave those, and if anybody wants to look at those.